Hello class, I'm going to do the video on the Survey to A&P final exam, which will cover all 14 chapters, and I've given you the dates of your final exam. If you're unsure about that, you can find the final exam schedule on the Northeast homepage, as well as I have sent an announcement in Canvas with your class day and time that you'll be taking your proctored final exam. And each of these are just note outlines, I guess you could say, of things that will be on the final exam. So I kind of felt like this would be beneficial to you so that you would not have to study all 14 chapters and not really know what I'm going to ask. So please understand that even though these are terms, you are responsible for knowing anything and everything about these terms. So let's get started. And again, I can't tell you exactly what's on the test, but I'm giving you the topics that you need to study from all of your chapters. And this outline does go in order from chapter 1 to chapter 14. So number 1 says visceral and proximal. You just need to go back, I think it's this chapter 1 obviously, to the chapter 1 notes and look up visceral and proximal. So when you go back to chapter 1 and study visceral and proximal, I'm basically just asking here, what do these terms mean? So I could ask you just a simple definition, for both of them, and as far as what they mean. There's really no critical thinking there, just simple definition there. Number 2, the directional terms, be able to answer questions related to body parts being inferior, proximal, distal. What that means is, if you recall from Unit 1 exam, from Chapter 1, you learned the directional terms as far as when a body part, and I'm referring to the anatomical position. So when you go back to Chapter 1, if you recall correctly, the photo of the anatomical position, I used that in class when I was lecturing, and your questions on your Unit 1 exam came from that, as far as, the chin is, say, inferior to the mouth because it's below it, and the knee is proximal to the ankle. That's just an example. So many other examples there that you might could think of, but that's what I mean. I'm going to use actual body parts such as axillary or inguinal, those kind of things. And I'll use that anatomical position terminology in order to see if you are able to master your directional terms. Number 3 says levels of organization in the body, chemical level, cellular level, tissue level. What that means is, if you recall the photo, I believe you all probably took a picture of it, but the levels of organization in the body from Chapter 1 that went from the chemical level, being the lowest level of organization of the body, the most simple, the most basic level was that chemical level. And I told you, you had to have that chemical level before you built up to an organism, but it went in order. It was the chemical level, the cellular level, and so forth. Tissues, tissue systems, organs, organ systems, organism, etc. So that's what I'm referring to there. Just know what is in each of those levels and what makes it up and what function it serves, such as the cellular level was the process, that's where the life begins. That's the processes of life. That's where they occur at, that cellular level. So that's what I'm talking about there. Number 4, what is a cell? What is a cell? That's just a general definition there. Number 5, terms, anatomy and physiology. Same thing. What is the definition of anatomy and what is the definition of physiology? Number 6, positive and negative feedback definition. So that, again, what is positive and negative feedback? Not only the definition, but of course I could ask you an example of those as well. But I think you should all know what positive and negative feedback is at this point. We've discussed it in every chapter throughout this course. 7, what is metabolism? And again, metabolism, what is it? Just go back to your notes and learn what metabolism is. It's a definition, and there's a couple types of metabolism. You've got catabolism, you have an anabolism. So learn what metabolism is. Hopefully you already know that by now. What is matter? Again, would find that in chapter 2, dealing with the chemistry chapter. So matter is basically anything that has weight and occupies space. That's just a simple definition of matter. But you can go back in chapter 2 and read about that. Number 9, what are proteins made up of? Meaning, what are the building blocks of a protein? So that's know your building blocks. What are proteins made up of? Well, is it fats? Is it nucleic acids? Is it nucleotides? Is it sugars? Is it amino acids? I don't know. What is it? So go back and see in chapter 2, what are proteins made up of? Number 10, what 4 elements make up 96% of the body? That's pretty cut and dry. That's going back to chapter 2, and what 4 elements consist of 96% of the body? Number 11, what do enzymes do in our cells? Well, what do enzymes do for our cells? You'll again find that in chapter 2. So go back and study enzymes and what is their purpose? What are they doing for our body? Number 12, what is the definition of an element and a compound? So that's what I mean. What is the definition of an element versus the definition of a compound? So I want you to know the difference in those two. Number 13, know the pH scale, and that pH of 14 measures a low concentration of hydrogen ions, where a pH of 0 measures a high concentration of hydrogen. And all that means is know your pH scale. If you recall correctly, I drew it on the board, and we put 0 at the far left end, we put 14 at the far right end, we put 7 in the middle, and neutral was 7. And anything to the left, so 0 to 6 was acidic. So the pH, of course, is low, 0 to 6. And we have the most highest concentration of hydrogens. And then once you reach that neutral area of 7, and you go to the other end, to the far right end, starting at 8, going to 14, your hydrogen concentration starts to get less, and your hydroxide concentration starts to get more, and we're more basic. So here we are full of hydroxide, the OH, not hydrogen. All right, 14, the definition of proton, electron, and neutron. So again, just know those definitions. You gotta walk out of this class knowing the difference in a proton, a neutron, and an electron. 15, what is cilia and flagella? This will get into chapter 3, dealing with our cells. So what are cilia and flagella? If you remember correctly, they are providing movement for our cell, but what's the difference in those two, and where are those found? So, cilia might be those short hair-like projections that are moving things across the surface of the cell, while flagella has that long whip-like tail. But where are they found? I gave you many examples in your notes. I talked about cilia in the respiratory tract. It's in the urinary tract. It's even in the ear canal. Flagella, we gave the primary example of our sperm cell. So learn, make sure you know the difference in cilia and flagella. 16, mitosis is the division of the nucleus and forms 2 cells after cytokinesis. I'm telling you there on that statement, that is what you need to know. And I hope to goodness that you know by now that mitosis is the division of the nucleus. We start out with one cell. We are copying and replicating that one cell, and we are forming 2 cells in the end result through cytokinesis. And cytokinesis is where we actually split that replicated DNA from that nucleus, and we get 2 new daughter cells as a result. 17, know what happens in phases of mitosis. So what are your phases? Well, we have interphase, and know them in order. You have interphase, prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, and cytokinesis. So know what happens in each of those phases. In interphase, you're copying, you're replicating. Prophase, you start to lose that nuclear envelope. It starts to disintegrate. Your replicated DNA starts to loosen. And then, of course, in metaphase, you line up along the equator. Anaphase, you're being pulled to opposite ends of the spectrum, the pole. Telophase, that's where you've got the cleavage furrow. So, of course, I've just briefly mentioned that, but go back to your notes and know about each of those phases and what happens in those phases. All right, 18, what is the cristae? What is the cristae? That's, again, we're dealing with chapter 3 here. We're dealing with talking about our cell and talking about our organelles. So the cristae has something to do with the mitochondria. So go back and make sure that you know what the cristae is. 19, what is the mitochondria, Golgi complex, and endoplasmic reticulum? That is just simply telling you, know what your organelles are, know what your organelles do in the cell. Each of your organelles has a responsibility and has a role for maintaining homeostasis of the cell. So what do each of your organelles inside that cell do? All right, number 20 says, what does the plasma membrane do for the cell? What does the plasma membrane do? We should know by now it is a selectively permeable membrane, meaning it selectively chooses what comes in and out of the cell. And again, it is controlling the movement of materials into and out of that cell. Remember, it is basically a phospholipid bilayer, meaning it's 2 layers of phospholipids. Know what that plasma membrane consists of. What is in that plasma membrane? Remember, there was lots of things embedded in that plasma membrane that does certain things for the cell. All right, 21, neurons are cells of nerve tissue which are specialized to form and transmit impulses. And that is basically what you need to know. That is just a statement, so make sure you know that statement there. Let's see, 22, hyaline cartilage covers the bone surfaces in joints and attaches to the ribs and the breastbone. And again, I need you to know that. That's just a statement that you need to know. 23, the mouth, esophagus, and vagina are lined with non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. And again, just know that. That's just a statement that I want you to know. 24, tissues that cover the body surface and line the body cavities are epithelial tissues. And that's just a definition of part of our epithelial tissues. So know that. And know, that is what your epithelial tissues primarily do. 25, what kind of tissue is blood? What tissue is blood? Remember from chapter 4 in lab when we looked up all of our tissues, and we looked at them all under the microscope. Blood, what was it? Was it an epithelial tissue? Was it a connective tissue? Was it a nervous tissue? Or was it a muscle tissue? All right. 26, what is fibrocartilage? That's just, what is it? If you'll go back and learn that, we're talking about here a specialized tissue. That fibrocartilage is what's located in those intervertebral discs in the spine. Remember, you've got the disc, then you've got the fibrocartilage, and then you've got disc, and then you've got fibrocartilage. And that fibrocartilage basically absorbs shock. That's why we don't have more back injuries than we do if we fall, or if we twist a certain way, or if we're in a car accident, because those intervertebral disc and that fibrocartilage, the way that they are positioned together. And of course, if you have a slipped disc, of course, that's when you have like bone rubbing on bone, and it's very painful. What is adipose tissue? Well, you learned again in chapter 4 about adipose tissue. And what is it? So I want you to go back in your notes and learn what adipose tissue is and what is it responsible for. What is the outermost layer of the skin? So this is getting into chapter 5, and we're talking about the layers of the skin. So you remember correctly, you have your epidermis, you've got your dermis, you've got a hypodermis, and so learn the layers of the skin and what they are responsible for. And then the layer within the epidermis that acts as the foundation, providing new cells, is the stratum basale. And if you remember correctly, I told you that was one of those questions that was critical thinking on your exam, dealing with, did you know what providing new cells means? Well, that just means undergoing mitosis, and that all occurs in the stratum basale. Okay, the next statement here, number 30, what is keratin and sebum? So just know what those two are, dealing with chapter 5, dealing with the integumentary system. 31, what are apocrine sweat glands and where are they located? So know what they are and where they're located, and you'll find that in chapter 5. 32, what is melanin? So what is melanin? Obviously, and by the way, melanin and melatonin, two different things. Melatonin is dealing with your endocrine system. It's a hormone that helps establish your sleep and wake cycles. Melanin is, of course, your skin pigment, but know what that is and what it's responsible for doing. 33, 3, know your body systems and what they consist of. So in other words, back, if you recall, I know this is not really going back to chapter 1, but I just wanted to mention that here. But if you remember in chapter 1, I briefly went through all body systems and just gave you a quick little synopsis of what exactly is going on. And I went through each body system and just said, this is what's going on. So make sure that you know what is occurring in each body system. And you should know that by now, because we've lectured on every body system and we've talked about each body system. So just know what each body system is responsible for. 34, what does exposure to sunlight stimulate the production of? If you are exposed to sunlight, what is being stimulated? 2 things, and you need to know those 2 things. Let's see, where am I at? Okay, what does yellow marrow act to do? So what is the yellow marrow? And you'll find that in your notes as well. And we're still in chapter 6. We're dealing with the bones now. 36, what is the diaphysis and the epiphysis? That's just simply a definition. So go to chapter 6 and know what those are. 37, what are osteocytes, osteoclast, and osteoblast? Remember, you've got to know the difference in those 3. Osteoclast and osteoblast, those 2 obviously are dealing with the bone remodeling process. So osteoblast will lay down new fresh bone, while osteoclast nibble away and take away bone. And osteocyte, that's just simply a bone cell. So know exactly what those 3 do. Number 38, what are fontanelles? If you remember correctly, we talked about fontanelles. We talked about them being these areas in the infant's, skull bones where they're not fused together. And we talked about them being open up until 12 to 18 months, because 1, to allow the brain to grow, and then of course to come through the birth canal. But anyway, know there that those are those non-ossified areas. That's those areas of the skull bones where they're not ossified together yet, until they close, of course, later in age. 39, the sutures of the skull are examples of synarthrosis joints, and I'm just simply telling you that. That's what you need to know. 40, an articulation is the joint formed between 2 bones. And I'm simply telling you that that's the definition that you need to know there. 41, the description of skeletal muscles, meaning is it multinucleated, striated, voluntary, involuntary, etc. That just means going to chapter 7, your muscular chapter, know the characteristics. And you took a picture of my screen on the board when I was lecturing of the chart that was giving these characteristics. But if you didn't, they're in your notes as well. So the difference in the characteristics of a skeletal muscle versus a smooth muscle versus a cardiac muscle. All right, 42, what is a sarcomere? So what is a sarcomere? We're dealing with, again, the muscular chapter, chapter 7. So know what a sarcomere does in the basic responsibility of a skeletal muscle. What is the sarcolemma? Again, know what the sarcolemma does within your muscles. What is acetylcholine? If you remember correctly, that's the neurotransmitter that we have to have for a skeletal muscle contraction to occur. But know what acetylcholine is and what it does. All right. 45, contraction of myofibrils results from myosin cross bridges pulling the actin filaments to the center of a sarcomere. So I'm simply telling you what you need to know there. So know that statement. 46, a skeletal muscle contains many fascicles of muscle fibers bound together by fibrous connective tissue. Again, just a simple statement. That's what I need you to know. 47, cramps in a muscle can be caused by a lack of ATP because you've used up all your ATP, if you remember correctly, in your hemoglobin. You've used it all up in your myoglobin. Of course, that's a result of your oxygen. You could have a buildup of CO2, and of course, that buildup of lactic acid, or you could simply have a blow to the muscle. But all of those would cause a cramp in the muscle. So that's just a statement that I'm telling you that you need to know. All right, 48, what is a synapse? Again, this is getting into the nervous system. So know what a synapse is. 49, what are the ependymal cells? Again, know what those are in relation to the nervous system. What does the medulla do? So again, Go back to your nervous system and know what your medulla does. 51, what does the cerebellum do? So know what it's, again, responsible for doing. What are your ventricles? So again, what are the ventricles? Go back to the nervous system. And you probably didn't study the nervous system very well because that was our online exam in Unit 4. So you're going to need to go back and refresh yourself on these topics here that I'm telling you that you need to know. 53, a nerve impulse is formed when a neuron's plasma membrane becomes permeable to sodium ions, and the sudden inflow of these ions depolarizes the neuron's plasma membrane. That's just a statement that you need to know. 54, what is the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems? Again, need to know what the difference is in these two nervous systems. And when you didn't probably study the nervous system very well because that exam was Unit 4 online, so go back and pay specific attention to these topics that I'm mentioning to you here. All right, we move on to the special senses portion of your nervous system, and you're going to get into 55 here where it's dealing with the ear. So what is the auricle? So know what the auricle is. 56, what is projection, adaptation, and accommodation? Again, that's dealing with the nervous system. What is referred pain? So know what referred pain is. What are cataracts? That's, of course, dealing with the eyes. 59, what is hyposecretion and hypersecretion? You're getting into the endocrine chapter here. So if you remember correctly, hyposecretion is not enough of a specific hormone, and hypersecretion is too much. So know, again, what those two terms mean. All right, number 60, the thymus gland is larger in children than in adults and aids in the maturation of cells active in the immune system. That is simply a statement that I'm telling you that you need to know. 61, what nervous system do we see the secretion of epinephrine or norepinephrine? So that specifically, I know we're talking about the nervous system, but what nervous system? Meaning, is it sympathetic nervous system, or is it parasympathetic nervous system, or is it the central nervous system, or is it the peripheral nervous system? So know which specific area of the nervous system do we see the secretion of epinephrine and norepinephrine. And those are the two hormones that, of course, give you that fight or flight adrenaline rush that you need when your body needs to react in an emergency situation. 62, what does the hormone oxytocin do? So oxytocin, again, dealing with the endocrine system here. What does the oxytocin do? We went over that when we lectured in the endocrine chapter. 63, what happens to the individual if they have a hyposecretion of T3? That's your thyroid hormone. So hyposecretion, so that would be undersecretion or not enough of that T3. So what kind of symptoms would they have if they had undersecretion of that T3 thyroid hormone? 64, what two organs remove the worn out red blood cells from circulation? That is in your notes when we talk about the blood chapter. So go back and read, and you should know the two organs that remove those worn out red blood cells. 65, what are hemocytoblasts? If you remember correctly, those hemocytoblasts, of course, are still in the blood chapter, and that of course, were those immortal cells that basically gave rise, to other cells. 66, polycythemia, so just know what polycythemia is. That was in the blood chapter. 67, in a given volume of blood, what percent is plasma and what percent is formed elements? Again, you got to go back. That was word for word, specifically in your blood chapter there, and it told you what percent was your formed elements and what percent was your plasma. What does hemoglobin do? So what does hemoglobin do? We should know this by now, but make sure that you know what your hemoglobin, what role it plays in the body. 69, what are your erythrocytes, or your red blood cells, your leukocytes, or your white blood cells, and your platelets, and what are they responsible for? So know what each of your know what your white blood cells are responsible for, red blood cells, and platelets. 70, what does a monocyte do? That is a type of white blood cell, so what is it primarily responsible for? 71, what is the most abundant chemical in plasma? You know that. It's straight from your notes. 72, what is an embolus? And embolus, we talked about in the blood chapter. That was some of your disorders in the very end of that chapter. We talked about people forming a blood clot, and if a blood clot moves, elsewhere in the body, if it breaks off and lodges, say, if it lodges in the heart, the lungs, or the brain, it can block another vessel, and of course that's known as an embolus. What is agglutination? We talked about agglutination when our blood types are incompatible, so know what that means. 74, the atria acts to receive blood from the veins while the ventricles pump blood away from the heart. That is a statement that I'm just telling you that you need to know. And 75, what is the coronary sinus? So just simply, what is it? What does it do? 76, what does the P wave of an ECG represent? So in the cardiovascular chapter, I went over each, P, Q, R, S, T wave of the ECG, and what does it mean? Does it mean atrial depolarization? Does the P wave mean atrial repolarization, or ventricle depolarization, or ventricle repolarization? So just simply know what the P wave, know what, in 77 here, know what the QRS wave on an ECG represents. So know, what those waves represent on an ECG. Also known as an EKG, but technically it's ECG. All right, 78. What is referred to as the natural pacemaker of the heart? So that's in your cardiovascular system, and that's the SA node. The SA node is your natural pacemaker. All right, 79. What is bradycardia and what's tachycardia? Those are just simply definitions, but from the cardiovascular system. So know what bradycardia and tachycardia is. 80, heart attacks are most likely to be caused by blockage of which vessel? That's in the cardiovascular system. So what is the main reason, or the most likely vessel when it's blocked? It's going to cause a heart attack. So what is that? What is atherosclerosis? That's just a disorder. You'll find that in the cardiovascular system as well. And then lost my place for a second here. Okay, 82. What kind of barrier are the skin and mucous membranes as part of an innate immunity? That gets into our lymphatic system, where we are talking about, your non-specific versus your specific defense systems. So the skin and mucous membranes, if you remember correctly, they're your mechanical barriers. That's something that the foreign invader is coming in contact with first. So make sure you go back and refresh yourself on that, those different parts of your defense mechanism in the lymphatic system. What is a lysozyme? So what is a lysozyme? That's in your notes there with your defense mechanisms of the lymphatic system. Lymph is filtered and cleansed by the lymph nodes before it is returned to the bloodstream. I'm just simply telling you a statement there that you need to know. What does the upper respiratory tract consist of? So again, what is the upper respiratory tract versus the lower respiratory tract, and what is the anatomy of each of those? All right. Okay, 86. What part of the respiratory system, when swallowing, prevents food from entering the trachea? So which portion of that respiratory system does that? That's in your notes. Where does the gas exchange in the lungs occur? Around 87. Yeah, 87. Where does gas exchange in the lungs occur? So again, where, and I went over this for several minutes, but where they resemble grapes, if you remember, a bunch of grapes, and they occur at the terminal end of that bronchial tree. So where does that gas exchange take place? All right, 88. What is the rugae? You're dealing with the digestive system here in the stomach, so know what the rugae is. Again, we did not lecture on this. You were responsible for studying this on your own. But of course, this deals with Unit 7, your online exam. So I'm specifically telling you, you need to know what the rugae is. You need to know what gastrin is. Gastrin is just a hormone. You'll read about in the digestive system. 90. What is the primary function of the large intestines? So make sure you know that. And then 91, what is the nephron? This is getting into your urinary system. So know that, of course, your nephron is just your main functional unit of the kidney. So know what a nephron is. 92, what is the primary function of the urinary system? Our primary function of the urinary system, we are to maintain the volume and composition of body fluids within normal limits, to maintain homeostasis, basically. So go back in the urinary system and make sure you understand what the primary function is. 93, what does the ureter do in the urinary system? So again, know what your ureter is. And then 94, the life stage at which the reproductive organs become capable are at puberty. That's a statement. I'm telling you that you need to know that. This is getting into the reproductive chapter. Again, I didn't lecture, so I didn't put many questions on here, so know that statement. And then 95, ovulation is stimulated by a surge in what hormone? So you need to know that. And I also went over that in the endocrine chapter as well, but you can find that in the reproductive chapter also. And then male secondary sexual characteristics are produced by what hormone? Again, we covered that in the endocrine chapter, as well as you'll find it in the reproductive chapter. And then treating menstruation as day 1, on which day should ovulation occur? And we talked about that in the endocrine chapter as well, but you'll also find it in the reproductive chapter. So I hope that helps, guys. If you have any questions, just email me. But I think I went over that just about as clearly as I possibly could. So I wish you all the very best. I know you're all going to do great, and I have enjoyed having each of you this semester. I know that your futures look bright, and you're all very, very intelligent and very, very capable of all the things that you set before yourself as far as your career goals and your lifetime goals. So I'm here to wish you the best of luck, and I've enjoyed having you, and I will see you on the day that we take our final exam. Thank you.